As Detective Jameson walked into the abandoned warehouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had received an anonymous tip that a group of drug dealers was using the building as a hideout, but he had been in law enforcement long enough to know that things were rarely that simple. As Detective Jameson walked into the abandoned warehouse, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had received an anonymous tip that a group of drug dealers was using the building as a hideout, but he had been in law enforcement long enough to know that things were rarely that simple. As Detective Jameson continued to explore the abandoned warehouse, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It was unnaturally quiet, with no sounds other than the echoing of his own footsteps on the concrete floor. He scanned the area, his eyes scanning every nook and cranny, but all he could see were empty crates and dusty corners. As he progressed deeper into the building, his flashlight illuminated the shadows and corners of the warehouse, revealing that there were no signs of any illegal activity. He had been expecting to find evidence of drug use or other criminal activities, but the complete absence of any such evidence was puzzling. He wondered if he had been lured into a trap, and paranoia began to set in. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Suddenly, a sound in the distance caught his attention, and he whipped around, his gun drawn and ready for action. But there was nothing there. As he made his way back towards the exit, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He checked his phone for any updates or new information, but the screen remained blank. His heart sank as he realized that the tip he had received could have been a hoax. But who would go through such trouble to trick him? He started to second-guess himself, wondering if he had missed something. Could there be a hidden room or passage that he hadn't found? He retraced his steps, examining every inch of the warehouse, but still came up empty-handed. Just as Jameson was about to call it a day and head back to the station, he heard a faint whimper coming from a nearby room. He drew his gun and cautiously approached the door, ready for whatever lay beyond. Jameson's heart started to race as he slowly approached the door from where he heard the faint whimper. His hands were shaking and he could feel sweat beginning to form on his forehead, but he steeled himself, taking a deep breath before putting his hand on the door handle. He pushed the door open with the barrel of his gun, peering inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from a small window high up on the wall. He strained his eyes, trying to make out any shapes in the gloom. Suddenly, he saw movement in the corner of his eye. He turned his gun towards the source of the movement, ready to fire. But as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw the shape of a small child huddled in the corner, trembling with fear. "Are you okay?" Jameson asked gently, his gun still trained on the room in case anyone else was hiding in the shadows. The child nodded, tears streaming down their face. "Someone took me from my school," they whispered, their voice shaking. "They locked me in here and left me alone." Jameson's heart went out to the child, and he holstered his gun before kneeling down next to them. "Don't worry, I'm here now. Can you tell me your name?" The child sniffled, wiping their nose on their sleeve. "Jenny," they stuttered. Jameson called for backup, and within minutes, the warehouse was swarming with officers searching for any sign of the kidnapper. But there was no trace of anyone. As they escorted Jenny to safety, Jameson couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. If the kidnapper had gone to such lengths to hide Jenny, why would they leave her in a room where she could easily be found? And why was there no evidence of any criminal activity? Jameson couldn't stop thinking about the case, and he decided to do some digging on his own. He went back to the warehouse, this time with a forensic team to look for any evidence that might have been missed. As they combed through the warehouse, they found something unusual. A hidden trapdoor that led to a secret room below the floor. It was clear that the kidnapper had gone to great lengths to hide this room, and Jameson was sure that this was where they had originally intended to keep Jenny. The forensic team found evidence that the room had been recently vacated, suggesting that the kidnapper had panicked and moved Jenny to the more visible room when they realized the police were closing in. Jameson was relieved that Jenny was safe, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. As he continued to investigate, he uncovered a web of deceit and betrayal that went far beyond a simple ransom plot. Jameson's intuition had been right. As he delved deeper into the investigation, he discovered that there was more to the kidnapping than just a desperate father trying to get ransom money. He found out that there was a much larger and more insidious plot at play. Through his investigation, Jameson uncovered a network of individuals who were involved in a web of illegal activities, including money laundering, fraud, and even murder. They were all connected to Jenny's father, who had been using his position as a banker to facilitate their criminal activities. Jameson's investigation was met with resistance at every turn. The corrupt police officer who was involved in the scheme tried to cover up evidence and intimidate witnesses, but Jameson refused to back down. He knew that he had to bring these criminals to justice. As he dug deeper, Jameson discovered that the kidnapping of Jenny was not an isolated incident. In fact, there had been several similar kidnappings over the past few years, and all of the victims had been children of wealthy individuals who were involved in the criminal network. It became clear that the kidnappings were being used as a way to exert control over the families and to force them to comply with the criminals' demands. The ransom money was just the beginning. The families were being used as pawns in a larger scheme. With the help of his team, Jameson was able to piece together the evidence and build a case against the criminals. It was a long and difficult process, but in the end, justice was served. The criminals were all brought to trial and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Jameson's dedication and hard work had paid off, and he had uncovered a web of deceit and betrayal that had been hidden in plain sight for years. As he looked back on the case, Jameson couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what he had accomplished. He had not only solved a kidnapping case, but he had also brought down a criminal organization and helped to bring justice to the victims and their families.